This is the Lincoln Journal-Star editorial board, and we are with Jazari Kual Zacharia. Did I get that right, Jazari? Did I blow it? Zacharia, doggone it. I should start again, but I'll just admit I blew it. And I even asked you in advance, and I apologize. You are running for the Democratic nomination for the 1st Congressional District, and we are here with the Journal-Star editorial board to do our endorsement interview. So I will let our other 2 board members on here introduce themselves, and then we'll launch into our questions. Martha, you want to go first?
Good morning. My name is Martha Ellen Florence, member of the editorial board and community member. And I guess that's all I'm going to say at this point. Thank you.
And I'm Kent Walgamot, and I'm the arts and entertainment writer at the Journal-Star. And I have been on the editorial board for more than a decade and have actually done editorials for filling in over 20 years. So I have some editorial board experience.
Yeah, Kent, we are going to have to talk since we aim to make these interviews fair to everyone. You're going to have to wear a shirt that cool for all candidates.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, raise the bar. All right, Jazari, we'll start with our first question for you. Why do you want this office, and what experiences and attributes qualify you for it?
So I thought about running for Congress actually in the summer of 2020. That's when I kind of thought of the idea of running for office. I kind of just looked at the things that our community was facing and how we were being represented at the federal level. And it wasn't aligning for me for the things that I go through, that my community members go through. And the person who's supposed to be speaking for us in Washington wasn't fighting for those issues that affect so many Nebraskans. I do a lot of advocacy work in the community, and that ranges from a variety of different things, whether that's helping with food insecurity, helping with homelessness aid, mentoring young students, working with kids, all across the board, just a variety of things that I do voluntarily within the community. The moment where I decided that I was going to run for Congress, I actually vividly remember it. It was at the beginning of 2021, kind of January, February, around that time. A family member had reached out to me because one thing I do is I have quite a visibility online. So a lot of people reach out to me, whether it's for aid, whether it's to connect me with people who can help with them with whatever aid they need. And a family had reached out to me, and they were living in a trailer house, and it was very run down. It was not in the best part of town. They were saying they didn't have like food, running water, things like that. And they asked if I could help them. So I went and I took some pizza, a heater, blankets, water, and all that type of stuff to them, and had to hand it through a window because their area wasn't plowed. They were living in a very, very, very bad part of town. And so, I was driving home and I was really thinking about that family and what they were going through. And that was around the time where the stimulus checks were being increased to $2,000, and those were being voted on. And our congressman didn't vote on it, but he commented that he wouldn't have because Nebraskans don't need it. And so that was kind of a moment that really dawned on me that the person who's supposed to be fighting to make sure that we are not put in a matter of life or death is not in touch with the situations that people here in District 1 face. And that was kind of the moment where I'm just like, okay, I have to do this. Not for myself, but for the people that I see and advocate for every day. They deserve more and they deserve better.
Okay, you missed an opportunity to brag about yourself here, because one of the questions we asked about was attributes. So what is it in your, what elements in your personality make you feel like this is something that you could bring your talents to?
Well, I am a very creative person. I work in content creation. And so I'm often thinking of creative ways to address and solve different issues. So I could definitely take that with me to Congress and figuring out ways to tackle issues that are affecting our community. For instance, I am a part of a original founding member of L&K Fridges. So I'm sure you guys have seen like the little free pantries around, but we started putting around little little mini fridges around town to make other foods accessible to people, whether that be milk, cheese, meat, all different products that you can't get from just a dry foods pantry. And so, yeah, I'm very good at talking to people. I am very personable, I like to think. And one thing I'm really good at is listening to every issue that people face. Um, and having that type of empathy, because all of our stories might not be the same, all our experiences might not be the same, but we all have different emotions and we all feel situations just as much as the next person. And so oftentimes we have a lot of people who like to do a lot of speaking and not enough listening. And so if we all just did a little bit more listening, we would realize we're not as different as we're made out to be or made out to believe we are.
Okay, that sounds great. We are gonna, just so you know, the last question we ask is gonna be kind of an open-ended one for you to answer anything that we didn't ask you, you wish you had. So don't sweat that there's something big at the end that, if you've got a stump speech, we'll be ready for it. But we've got some other specific questions on the way. First of all, what would you do? What could you do to help close a partisan rift in Congress? I mean, obviously, Congress is, dysfunctional in many ways, and it's divided in a partisan manner. What could you do to help that?
The number one thing I like to do is reach out to sides that don't necessarily agree with me, just so that I can have a better understanding. For instance, one thing that I just do in my own life is I do a lot of like freelance journalism, and I would go out and live stream different events, and I would go to different groups who were either rallying or protesting or things that I don't necessarily agree with, but I'm going to go there in that situation to try to understand. And so just extending that olive branch, like, hey, like I may not completely agree with the issues or whatever you're or the things that you're most passionately concerned about, but I would like to listen and understand and see if we can kind of find some middle ground here. And so that's the other thing. We see a lot of speaking and not enough listening, and not enough people who are willing to listen. And I feel like that's just something that needs to be changed all across the board in Congress. Because if you're the only person who's willing to listen to the other side and nobody else is, that's almost hard to do in Congress, as we've seen. And so I definitely reach out to other people who don't look like me, think the same things I do, believe the same things I do, but in hopes to try to understand and to find some common ground there.
Okay. Nebraska is, first and foremost, I mean, first district's a little bit different, but Nebraska itself is first and foremost an agricultural state. Do you have any thoughts on ag policy, international trade? What might need to be done to, strengthen that part of Nebraska's economy?
Well, the number one thing I'm fighting for is the climate action with the climate crisis. And so if we don't address that, we're not going to have agriculture anymore. I'm sure you guys remember in 2019 when we had devastating floods that wiped out farms in Western Nebraska. And it was a very bad repercussion of the climate crisis and things that are happening. And I believe those families and those farms are still trying to recover to this day from all of that. Harvesting seasons are changing, the weather patterns are becoming more disruptive. But yeah, so making sure that we are in a position in the future to be able to have healthy agriculture is a number one concern of mine, because it ties in with the climate crisis and how that's all affecting us.
Okay, thank you. Immigration is a federal issue. Nobody's fixed it. Everybody says it needs to be fixed. What path do you see to fixing it? What would be the solution in your mind, or a pathway to a solution?
So I look at I'm actually a child of refugee immigrants who came over from what's recognized as South Sudan. So I know a lot of people who have immigrated to the US. I have gone to South Sudan twice, where my family's originally from, over the last year. And I had looked at what it takes for somebody to come to the US to just visit. And it's extremely hard to have somebody just come here and visit and for a month or two and then go back. there are so many things that tie into immigration. And I think the number one hot button issue is people think that, oh, we're just like letting people flood across our borders. Why don't they just come here legally? When in fact, a lot of people don't know what it takes to come to the US legally. And a lot of people don't understand like what it takes to naturalize in the US. I was just looking at some of the requirements when my mom had naturalized and became a US citizen. It costs several $100s. You have to answer 100 questions about American history. You can only take the test twice, otherwise your application is denied, and then you have to go through the application process again and pay hundreds of more dollars. The US requires some documents that aren't issued by different countries. So for instance, I know in South Sudan, we have kind of a form of birth certificate, but it's not the exact same as what we have here in the US. And so the US requires documents that some countries don't issue for people to come over here and visit or to immigrate here. And that's something that needs to be changed and something that needs to be looked at. And as far as the accessibility of trying to naturalize as a US citizen, not everybody can afford $700 and some dollars, afford to fail the test twice and then pay that again. So now I just hit my microphone. Sorry. So now you're almost 15.
Okay, you're enthusiastic for this. I appreciate it.
So now you're $1,500 in the hole. But I think the thing is a lot of people don't realize when people come, I think they realize, but it's hard to understand the situation that people are in when they're trying to come into the US. They're coming for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And oftentimes you hear people the story is that people just want to come here to have a good job, send their kids to school, and be a part of a community that's accepting, where they can be free and be themselves and raise their families in a safe environment. And we've restricted a lot of people from coming. One thing that I like to talk about is when I went to South Sudan, I saw a lot of people who are over 7 foot that I feel like would be very good basketball players here in the US. There's a lot of brilliant people who have a lot of talents and gifts that they could share. But we have to be more willing to embrace those people and look at how we allow people into our country, and maybe easing some of those restrictions a little more and kind of just adapting to how the rest of the world operates with legal documents that are issued to citizens and people.
Okay, thank you. So when you, at the start of the interview, you mentioned looking around and seeing how the needs of the people of, District 1 aligned with what was, being dealt with in Washington. So this question, I'm sure will, you can riff on this one quite a bit. What are your priorities on a national level, and how do they relate to Nebraska's and the 1st Congressional District's needs? What are your key issues?
So one of my key issues, of course, I mentioned, is the climate crisis, making sure that we are wanting to fight for legislation and policy that really invests in clean and renewable energy. We oftentimes have, or I feel like once a year, there's always something crazy that happens where we're just like, ooh, I didn't know that was a thing. Like the devastating floods in 2019, when we had to have scheduled power outages to rewrite power because power grids were being overheated, because there were freak storms that were happening everywhere. But then we forget about those things. And so I want to make sure that we are investing in clean and renewable energy so that we don't have to be so reliant on fossil fuels or non-renewable energy. Affordable college tuition is another thing. I personally, I'll finish my college education 10 years after I graduated high school. And that's not because I'm not smart or anything like that. It's simply because it was inaccessible to me and my family. I'm the youngest of 6 kids raised by a single mother. There was nothing left by the time it got to me or my turn. And so I kind of had to find that path myself. Not sure if you guys know, but Nebraska has the largest, or one of the largest Sudanese and South Sudanese populations, immigrant populations in the entire country. But there hasn't been a person of that community that has ran for an office in any level that I can recall. And so making sure that that aspect of the community is also being heard and their needs are also being met and understood. When people campaign for different offices, they tend to focus just on groups to just make sure they secure the vote. But win or lose, you still have to go back to those community members and explain why you weren't championing or fighting for issues that may have affected them in some way. And just because they don't make up enough votes to push you over the edge, I don't think is a good enough excuse, because at the end of the day, it's about representing all Nebraskans from all walks of life and making sure that everybody has a voice that is heard. Another thing that I'm really fighting for is OT 40, which is zero tax after 40. The pandemic has really put a spotlight on how fragile our economy is and how bad we are affected when something like that happens, like a pandemic. And oftentimes, we talk about people, or you hear people saying that people just want things free from the government. People want things free from the government. I like to approach things in a way that kind of fixes and creates a concrete solution all across the board, or gives people the tools that they need to be successful and recover. And so OT 40 is zero tax after 40. And so that's protecting people's overtime pay. So after you're taxed on 40 hours, then your overtime pay is protected. And people can use that to recover however they see necessary, whether that is paying off their mortgage early, getting a down payment on a house to level up, putting that in their retirement, or paying off debt that they might have so that they are in a better financial position, or put it in a fund to save for their kids to go to college. We have a lot of meat packing plants here in Nebraska, a lot of production work where a lot of overtime is worked by many people. And so I often think about how much better those people would be, or whatever their situation would be, if their overtime was protected and they weren't put into another tax bracket. Because there's often that catch-22, when you try to work a little more to get ahead, but it's also a double-edged sword because you get taxed more. I've had that happen to myself, and a lot of people do too. And also Social Security checks for those who are retired. Those are federally taxed, and I feel like that's something that shouldn't be. And also tips for servers. So there needs to be something that goes into place, whether they are paid a fair wage or their tips aren't taxed, to help them, like I said, level up however they can. So this would be giving people the tools they need to make their situations better however they see fit for them.
I do have to say, I'd never heard of OT 40 before. When you said zero tax after 40, I got really excited because I thought it was 40 years old, but I guess it's 40 hours. Okay, I get it. Anyway, keep going, Jazari. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, it's okay. And lastly, I worked in student loan servicing for 4 years. So I've taken thousands of calls and listened to thousands more calls of people who are struggling to pay their student loan, always looking for payment relief. They're in a situation where they weren't financially knowledgeable on the types of loans they were taking out in pursuit of higher education, because they genuinely thought they were doing something to better their lives. And so I've spoken with people who are 80, 90, 200, $400,000 in student loan debt who just aren't able to afford it. And so there's the concern of wiping out student loan debt. And a lot of people think that's extreme. But when I look at the federal loans when I look at the student loans that the federal government gives out to students, they go to Title IV schools. So those are schools that accept FAFSA. What can we do to make sure that we're not putting out so many student loans, so that we're not in a position 50 years from now, like, oh, now we got to try to cancel like billions more of student loan debt. So maybe limiting tuition costs, or what public universities can charge, because private institutions are private institutions. But public universities that charge so much in tuition costs that aren't matching, that just aren't affordable for a lot of people. We have the Nebraska Promise, which I believe they just increased their income limits. But prior to that, I believe it was if you come from a household that makes $60,000 or less, and your tuition is free. But there are so much more there's so much more that goes into just tuition, that student fees. But there's a lot of people who maybe are just slightly over that threshold. And plus, that's just Nebraska. That's not a national thing. And so either way, it's one of those things where the situation has to be addressed as a whole. Otherwise, it's not going to get any better. But yeah, those are some of the ideas that I have.
Okay. We have one last question that's sort of the get on your soapbox question. But before then, Martha or Kent, do you have any follow-up questions?
Of course I do.
I do too, but go ahead, Ken.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
Jazari, thank you for being here. And you talked a little bit about the ag situation in Nebraska as it relates to climate, but also ag situation as right now we're in the issues with the Ukraine and how that can affect particularly Nebraska farmers. Can you talk a little bit about, if you were to go to Congress, some of the things you would support on behalf of Nebraska farmers? Because we know that Ukraine has the highest production of wheat, and they're not going to be planting any wheat anytime soon. So some things that you can do to support Nebraska farmers, funding, get them so they can be a little more solvent, those kinds of things. So that's another thing. Although you're representing CD1, there are a lot of agricultural areas in here as well. So
yeah, I do support funding to help boost different types of production or different types of farming. Like we've seen with the Ukraine situation, any little thing that kind of like tips the balances one way or another can really affect us. And people wouldn't think that something in Ukraine on the other side of the world would definitely affect us. But yeah, I do believe in supporting and funding farmers to be able to expand production on different types of agriculture so that we are able to be more self-sustaining. Because not only does that help Nebraska and our local economy, it would also help us as a country so that we don't have to be so reliant on imports from other countries. Versus, so when something like the crisis that is the war that's happening in Ukraine right now wouldn't really impact us so much because we are more self-sustaining. And that's one thing that I'm very passionate all across the board. So I look at South Sudan, where my family is originally from, and unfortunately they are very, very far behind. So they have to rely on different imports and different help from other countries to progress. But, here in the US, we are in a position where we can create more jobs for American people, put more into our local economy so that we as a nation are relying on ourselves and a lot more stronger.
thank you.
Kent?
This is sort of two-part that are related, but first, and I'm asking this of all the candidates for the federal election and most for the states. Do you believe that Joe Biden is the legitimately elected president? And secondly, on the federal level, what are your what's your thoughts, your positions on the various John Lewis Voting Rights Act, those sort of measures that are about the right to vote and voter suppression and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I do believe that Joe Biden is the legitimately elected. I believe and I trust in our election system that it is free and it's fair. So there's that. But yeah, with the voting rights, I definitely think that we need to make sure that voting rights are protected because that is a fundamental part of democracy. And once you start seeing, and it's not even just the voting rights in the John Lewis Act, you look at different states. Ohio is now going through a battle of redistricting and making sure that their representatives are able to, that there's different demographics in their population, specifically Black communities, are able to vote for people they feel would represent them best. And right now they're being disenfranchised and put in a position where they're not able to do that. So I think voting rights need to be protected. We need to make sure that everybody has access to the ballots and we're not restricting anybody from casting their vote, because American citizens all deserve the right to vote because that is what makes up our democracy. And once we start tampering with that, and once we start messing with that and restricting people and blocking them from the ballots, then that's when we're going to start seeing our democracy fall. And it's going to be taken over and hijacked by specific groups.
All right. Well, we are down to the last few minutes and we're down to the last question. So, Jazari, what did we not ask you that you wish we had? Something that you were just dying to say and we didn't give you that opportunity. Anything?
I just would like to say, I look at running for office and holding office more as a form of service. The same as helping your neighbors, the same as running, the same as, the same as serving the military. It's a form of service to me. I don't look at it as a career goal or something that you should hold on to until you decide to retire or until you decide that it's just not for you anymore. I running for Congress is a very big undertaking, but I think it's important because not only am I the first person of color that I can think of that has run for District 1, but I'm also, I believe, the youngest person to try to take on this. And I think that's important, that we need to have accurate representation on all levels and a fair balance of it. Right now, out of the 400 plus members of Congress, there's only one person under the age of 30. And so that relatability with a young person in Congress, making sure that young adults are represented or they're bringing ideas from young adults to the table when we are looking at creating legislation and laws that impact everybody in our country. We definitely need more young people, more relatable people across the board in all different types of offices. My ultimate goal, I would say, if I were elected to Congress, probably be there for at most 8 years and then get behind another 25, 26-year-old, because how long can you run with a torch before you start walking? It's important to pass that along and make sure that other ideas are brought to the table. I often look at the people who are representing us in Congress, and a lot of them have been there for a very long time. And so I feel like a lot of them are walking with the torch and not running with it. And ideas are not being brought to the table, and creativity is not being brought to the table. I was telling one of my friends the other day, we look at young people to shape our culture, right? When you look at musicians winning Grammys, winning Emmys, TV shows, movies, everybody loves Tom Holland, the new Spider-Man, right? We look at young people to shape our culture and our experiences and things like that. We look at young people to go off to war and defend our country, but we don't allow young people to sit at the table, making sure they have a voice in those decisions that are made. And so, win or lose, I do hope my candidacy inspires other young people to run for a legislature, city council, school board, or Congress to make sure that we have a voice in every space and in every place. And that includes minorities too.
All right. Well, Jazari, thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate it. We will interview all candidates in contested races, formulate our endorsements. Don't have a timetable for that just yet. We do want to get these done as soon as possible by April 4th and the beginning of early voting. But we really appreciate your time this morning, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. See you later, editorial board. See you later, Jazari.